Hi, my name is Dr. Aimee Grant. You can call me Amy. I'm autistic and I'm dyslexic, and I'm also an associate professor at Swansea University. As part of that role, I lead the Autism from Menstruation to Menopause project. And within that, me and my team reviewed 81 research papers that were focused on autism and puberty. And a lot of them came from the views of parents. And one of the key things that parents talked about was being worried about how to support their child through puberty. They had quite a few worries. So they were a bit worried about saying the wrong thing when it came to sexuality. Parents of girls tended to be quite worried about sexual exploitation from boys and men. Parents were really quite worried about their child touching their genitals in public or touching others without consent. But actually, that was just a small amount of people talked about that happening. So the worry tended to be bigger than the actual thing. We also had some concerns about their child starting to smell due to those puberty hormones and not showering as often as might be needed to keep up with those hormones. And also, some parents were worried about the way that their child dressed or behaved, the toys they played with, particularly if it was different to what they might have expected for the gender their child was assigned at birth. So we had quite a lot of worries from parents, but I thought it might be useful to talk about how you can talk to your child about some of these things. And, it's completely okay to be worried and completely normal to be worried. But I wanted to give you 5 tips today that might make it more comfortable for both you and your child as you're talking about these things. So, number one is to find some resources that can help you. You can find so much good stuff these days on the internet. I really like the Amaze guides and videos, they're freely available. Some of them are targeted at parents, so they're to help you to understand stuff before talking. Others are things for children. You might want to have a look at them first, just so you know what's coming up and you can anticipate any questions. If your child finds reading harder, for example, if they've got a learning disability, maybe they're dyslexic, the UK NSPCC has some really nice, easy read guides on puberty that you might find useful. Next, think about starting early before puberty begins. So this is tip number 2. Um, if you've missed this one already, if your child's already going through puberty, it's okay. But if they haven't, I'd recommend you start early. One of the things that participants in our review and in our wider research talked about was the benefit of finding out information in a little and often style. So some autistic people said that they got loads of information at once and it was either overwhelming or it was confusing. They misunderstood what was going to happen. So share information early, little and often, and you might also want to keep topics separate. So, for example, like not talking to your child about periods and erections on the same day, as that can be confusing. They might expect both things to happen. Another thing that might be confusing is thinking about if their voice might get deeper. So, talking about boys' puberty and girls' puberty together might actually be unhelpful and confusing for people who won't have those things happen to them. Top tip number 3 is to use clear and direct language. Now, you've probably heard this in lots of places because it's generally always good to use clear and direct language and also really direct questions for autistic people. Or we might find it hard to understand what you mean. We might say everything's okay because we haven't understood the question. Another thing that's recommended is to use correct terms for body parts, so like breast, penis, vagina, and vulva with children. And this has been found to make them more confident in talking about their body, the changes that are happening to their body, and also it protects them by giving them language to use in case of any assault that might happen to them. Moving on to tip number 4, focusing on consent keeps everybody's safe. So this should be for boys, girls, non-binary children. And I would say you can model consent with your child every day. So you can ask them questions, give them choices and respect those answers. So often, for example, we might expect children to hug people who've been visiting, but actually instead, perhaps the question should be, would you like a hug? Can I have a hug? Do you want to high five me? And absolutely, in any case where a no answer is given, that should be respected. They shouldn't be cajoled into giving that bodily contact. And that's going to be really important in terms of girls who are more vulnerable to sexual assault. We do know from the research on autistic adult women that 90% said that they had experienced a sexual assault at least one point in their lives. So this is really, really important. Autistic boys are also at risk, and also we need to make sure that they're going to check in on consent before engaging in any sexual contact with girlfriends or boyfriends in the future. And finally, top tip number 5, when it comes to periods, ongoing support might be needed from parents. So, as part of the Autism from Menstruation to Menopause project, we also did a review of autism and periods. And we found that parents often wanted their children to be completely independent in how they manage their period. But actually, autistic people said they were happy to have some support, and sometimes they needed that support. So that could be because of challenges with executive functioning, so remembering or doing steps. It's not simple to change a pad, for example. You need to do a lot of little steps to be able to do that whole thing in a way that's going to actually capture any menstrual blood. So you might want to have a conversation where you ask them what they'd like help with or what they find difficult, or you could directly ask them about some common aspects of managing periods. So, for example, would you like me to remind you to keep your bag stocked with period products? Or would you like me to check every day and I can keep your bag stocked with period products? Would you like me to remind you when it's time to change your pad or particularly your tampon, with toxic shock syndrome as a risk, or any other menstrual products? And also potentially knowing that autistic people tend to have more alexithymia. So that means not being quite so in touch with what is making us dysregulated. We might also have less strong bodily signals. That's known as interoception. So it might be helpful for you to look out for signs that they're in pain. So perhaps they're communicating differently to normal, or maybe you notice that they always do a particular stim if they're in pain, and you could then proactively offer them comfort or even pain relief, just to make sure they're more comfortable. Now, those were just 5 tips. I'm sure there are lots of other things you're already thinking about. And yes, thank you so much for your time today.